First, we have a 2-year pandemic, followed immediately by a shooting war in the middle of Europe. Now, do you believe me when I say we are living through a crisis period? What matters now is what are you and I going to do about this? Back in the early 90s, Doug Casey wrote a book called Crisis Investing for the 1990s. Well, I think we need a new version now, Doug, because we are living in the most trying period of most of our lives. And what I want to do in today's episode of Renegade Investor Report is talk about what you need to be doing right now to survive in this crisis period. And probably the first thing you could do is to buy yourself a copy of this book, The Fourth Turning, because we are in the fourth turning. This book was written 25 years ago, and it's predicting everything that's happening right now. Not just the fact that we've got pandemics or the fact that we've got a crisis, a military crisis in the middle of Europe, but talking about loss of faith in institutions, about a whole kind of great reset long before Klaus Schwab and his buddies coined that term. And we are in this dangerous time. And if you haven't woken up yet, I mean, I still speak to people who have had no idea of what's been going on in Canada for the last few weeks. They don't realize, A, the fact that there's been a truckers' peace and freedom protest, and B, how brutally it's been suppressed by the dictator there, Justin Trudeau, and how people's rights have been withdrawn on the flimsiest of evidence. People's bank accounts have been frozen. People are being chased all back around the country for the heinous crime of having donated some money to this cause. And then the people that you donate the money to decide not to even give it to them. This is a bizarre set of circumstances that we're living through, a very dangerous set of circumstances. And so many people have still got their head in the sand. So please wake up. It's time to take action to protect yourself from what could be happening in your country very soon. And if you think it could never happen where you are, I can send you some of my patented naivety pills, because believe me, none of us is safe. The spread of authoritarian communism across the Western world in the last 2 years has been astonishingly rapid and astonishingly little resisted by the masses. And I know if you're watching this channel, you're probably kind of tuned into this way of thinking that I share. But believe me, an awful lot of your friends, family, and work colleagues are not. And they are in for such a shock as they see how quickly apparently democratic governments can turn, and how quickly the financial system that we all take for granted can be switched off. We talk about cancel culture on social media, and we're kind of trying to come to terms with that. What we're seeing now is cancel culture in the financial system. And when you see how quickly a particular country has been cut off from things like the SWIFT system, the SWIFT system is actually an archaic old system that would be, I suspect, rather easy to hack and disrupt. So watch out for, shall we say, some unintended consequences of these politicians wanting to be seen to do something other than actually get involved in the shooting war. So, for us as investors, as people who want to kind of look after our freedom, there's some serious things we need to be doing right now. So let's have a look at them. I've got 7 strategies that I want to share with you for how to survive the 2020s. The first one is to have a clear, documented plan, an investment strategy. And I've broadened it out, to be honest, into a life strategy and a lifestyle strategy, because are you safe in the country where you live? Could you ever have imagined a laid-back, happy-go-lucky country like Australia treating its citizens the way it has in the last couple of years, or its neighbor New Zealand with what they're calling the Kiwi Mussolini in charge? Look at Austria. Look at Germany. Suddenly, big change in Germany now, where they're going to start spending on defense. This is the country that's switched off their nuclear. They've moved away from coal. Now they're totally reliant on guess who for their energy supplies. What kind of strategy was that, Angela Merkel? Wow. Well, in Germany, until very recently, if you hadn't taken your medicine, you were being regarded as an enemy of the state. Isn't it funny how eerily quiet all that stuff's gone now. How nice to have this distraction of a war in Europe so that we can all kind of quietly forget the way we've been completely misled, and apparently we can't even see the data on the effectiveness of these medicines for the next 75 years, but that's a whole separate topic. But what's your investment and lifestyle strategy for the 2020s? Where do you stand on things like ESG? It's become the flavor of the month, but the reality is an awful lot of greenwashing is going on. An awful lot of malinvestment, I think, is going on because people refuse to recognize that we still need fossil fuels to transition to green and renewable energy in the future. And there are actually, I think, some brilliant investment opportunities in fossil fuels right now because they're so hated. They're not investing in looking for new oil or new coal, and yet the demand for it is still soaring because the other renewables are simply not there, not in place. What's your attitude to that? What's your attitude to investing in China, given the way that they are looking like they're not far behind in terms of doing the sorts of things that Mr. Putin is doing? What about Russia? These have all got to be part of your own investment thinking and your own investment decisions. But the point is, write it down. Give yourself the discipline, force yourself to have the discipline of having a written plan, and things will start to become clearer. You can challenge yourself. Why am I saying this? Why have I got that written down as part of my strategy? Chances are nobody else in your circle is there for you to have this conversation with. So you've got to have it with yourself. Write it down, think it through, and then come up with a written plan for how you think you're going to survive and thrive in this challenging time. Now, what you're going to need is real, genuine, global diversification. You have to treat the world as your chessboard. It's no good just thinking about, I live in the UK, therefore I'm going to invest in this UK income fund and this UK growth fund. The biggest growth in the stock markets happens in places like Iran and Afghanistan. You've got to look around the world for the opportunities, and you've got to look for different asset classes as well. You can't just be in technology shares in America. They've had a brilliant decade in the 2010s. Do you really think that's going to continue in the 2020s? On the other hand, certain things like commodities have had a terrible decade. Value stocks had a terrible decade. Might that be about to change in the 2020s? So you need global diversification across countries, continents, currencies, asset classes, so that you're in almost everything. And that way, wherever the growth is, you're going to benefit. Wherever the downsides are, you're going to have some kind of hedging against that because you're going to be in other, hopefully unrelated asset classes. You've got to think about things that will give you some growth. And that's obviously in the past decade, that's been the tech stocks that have shot the lights out with all their exponential growth. That's probably not going to be what happens in the 2020s. So where's the growth going to come from? Is it in value stocks? Is it in commodities? You're going to have to look for income. So you're going to look for dividend paying stocks. You're going to look for perhaps some REITs, some real estate investment trusts that give off regular and good income, royalty companies that pay high dividends. But you've also got to look at wealth protection, particularly purchasing power protection, because even the government statistics on inflation suggest we're up around 5, 6, 7%. If you saw my recent video on the UK figures from the Office for National Statistics, you'll know that for any real family living a real life in the real world, inflation in 2021 was nearer 15%. So your cash, if that's what you've got your wealth in, is losing 15% of its purchasing power every year. It'll be all but gone by the middle of the decade if you don't take any action. And then what about longer term? If you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s, you're going to start thinking about wealth transfer to the next generation and all the tax implications around that, because obviously governments are broke. They're going to look for new ways to part you and your wealth through all kinds of taxes. In the UK, we've had a freeze on virtually every tax allowance for the next 5 years. That's an enormous cost to people in the UK. The tax burden is already the highest it's been since the Second World War. And by the middle of this decade, it's going to be probably the highest it has ever been. And this is under a supposedly conservative government. And they're also about to introduce new taxes in April, ostensibly to help the NHS. We all know that it's just another great big way of bringing in money to fund their political agenda. So you need structure that covers growth, income, protection, and ultimately transfer of wealth. You've got to try, and this is one of the hardest things of all in the current markets. They're so manipulated by central banks. Uncorrelated assets, where if one of them goes up, hopefully, one of them goes down, hopefully something else is going up. If they're correlated, they tend to go up and down together. Recently, for example, things like Bitcoin, which was positioned as an uncorrelated asset, has tended to move in lockstep with things like the NASDAQ and the technology shares. Hopefully, the way things are going now, I think that could change for reasons that should become obvious. So what you've got to do is try and have a mixture of assets that are not correlated, but you've also got to regularly review your asset allocation, both in the sense of what's already in your portfolio and also what you do with the new money coming in. So, for example, I know loads of people with residential property portfolios who have stopped putting new money into buy-to-let and have started going into other areas like cryptos or even, technology stocks or high growth stocks. They just want something other than property because they're terribly overweight in bricks and mortar. And when you start looking at diversification, it then becomes an argument about asset allocation. How much goes into each of these buckets? And have I got so much in this one and so little in this one that I need to at least start putting new money into this one, even if I don't actually start divesting this one? Because obviously things like property, very expensive and very lumpy to divest, whereas things like stocks and shares and ISAs and pensions, you can make moves a little bit quicker, a little bit cheaper, and a little bit more nuanced as well. But properties tends to be big old lumpy stuff. This is absolutely critical. Whatever you're doing, switch off your phone for a second, please, and give me your full attention. You need more than one place to go. Look at what has happened in so many countries in the last couple of years. How much clearer evidence do you need before you wake up? I have been banging the drum on this for 5 years, and I've had very little traction with it. Everyone says, yeah, interesting idea. Yeah, I must get around to that. Yeah, I must look at that. Oh, but I'm a bit busy over here. Hey, I'm talking about not just money here. I'm talking about your liberty. I'm talking about freedom of movement. I'm talking about freedom to travel. I'm even talking about freedom of assembly, whether that's to a peaceful protest or even going to church. Look how quick they were to close down churches during this banana syndrome. I can't believe it. The one place you think you might want to go and actually find some peace and some spiritual solace, closed because we don't want your type coming in here, especially if you haven't taken your medicine. These basic freedoms are so important. They were won at the cost of millions of lives in 2 world wars in the last century, and yet we have given so many of them up so lightly in the last 2 years in the name of keeping safe from this common cold. No, sorry, it's not. I know it's worse than a cold a bit, but at least our 96-year-old queen has managed to recover from it, so it can't be that bad. Another critical point. Obviously, if you're going to go somewhere else in the world, you need to have the ability to make some money wherever you go. And that's much, much harder if you're an employee with a job. But if you can have a business that is preferably, online, preferably location independent, then as long as you've got an internet connection, you can be anywhere in the world. Now, it sounds like a dream. There's a lot of people peddle all sorts of BS online about how to live that dream. And here's my Lamborghini and here's my helicopter and stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something you can do to put food on the table, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in the Caribbean, whether you're in Portugal, you've got to have some way of making a living. So location independent businesses are absolutely key to that. Have you thought about it? Have you got skills you could use online? Have you got a hustle you could start on the side and then maybe build into more of a full-time income? The point is, are you thinking about this stuff? Because if you're not, you really should be. And then the final point, I think, is especially as you start to achieve a level of success and you start to acquire assets, you need sophisticated tax planning that optimizes your position in what could be multiple countries. And it's relatively straightforward to find tax experts in a single country. The harder part is to find people who can optimize your position if you have assets in multiple countries. But you need to find them and you need to be ready to pay the fees because these guys know how to charge. But as ever, you'll find that usually you'll save a lot more than you spend. But these are the sorts of things you should be doing right now. And there's an obvious impact on your wealth pyramid. If you've known me for any length of time, you'll know that my proprietary wealth pyramid is how I help people to structure their investments, to do their asset allocation, and to understand where they are in building real, diversified, long-term, multi-generational wealth. The wealth pyramid's got 4 layers, starting with the bedrock layer, which is all about preserving wealth. It's all about preserving purchasing power and assets that can help you to do that. You've then got the passive income layer, which is all the things that will actually put money in your pocket every month, every quarter, every year, helps you to put food on the table, because the things in the bedrock layer often do not throw off income by their nature, but they do preserve wealth. They preserve purchasing power. In the passive income layer, it's all about getting that income, whether that's rents from property, whether that's dividends from shares, interest on loans. That's what's going on in that layer. The one that most people don't think about is the global diversification layer. Now, I don't just mean owning assets. That could be property abroad. It could be bank accounts abroad, businesses abroad. It can also be things like citizenship by investment programs. It can be digital nomad visas, anything that gives you more than one place to go. That's absolutely key. Then at the pointy end of the pyramid, that's where we put the kind of frothier stuff, the higher risk, higher return stuff, the Forex trading, crypto trading, property planning uplift, flipping properties, taking part in IPOs or ICOs or even IGOs these days with initial game offerings. So those are the kinds of things that go in the structure of your wealth pyramid at each layer. But in today's situation, I think there are 2 layers that you particularly need to focus on. One is global diversification. You have to have more than one place to go. If you haven't even thought about it, now surely is the time to do it. I mean, what more? I really want to shake people, put a bomb under them, because this is so important. You could lose your liberty in your country just for turning up at a peaceful protest. The degree to which authoritarianism has taken root in the last 2 years is astonishing, and it's not going to go away. I notice Scotland is hanging on to its emergency powers longer than it needs to. Have you noticed what an argument against devolution, the way Scotland and Wales have competed to have more extreme measures than England just because they can? And the hell with their impact on their citizens or their economy. They're going to flex their political muscles because they've been given those powers. How crazy is that? They've had to pass a new law in Canada to stop municipalities doing things that the regional government doesn't want them to do. Once you give power to politicians, it's so hard to get it back. It's kind of a ratchet effect. And the biggest enemy of all this is the complacency of the masses. And, you've got to write to your MP. You've got to push back against this stuff. As the Canadian truckers have shown, it doesn't take much to trigger a big response, but somebody has to take the lead. Why not you? In your community, in your circle of influence, be the one that actually pushes back against this stuff, because it's not okay, and it's not going to go, the genie's not going to go back in the bottle anytime soon. Already, if there's a bit of bad weather, we're going to have a lockdown. If there's a bit of snow, we're going to have a lockdown. I mean, that has got into the vocabulary of politicians now. So be very careful, because it ain't going to go away anytime soon. The other thing we've seen, and this is reminiscent of what we've seen in the past. You've probably watched on the news the queues at the ATMs in Russia. Obviously, with the ruble collapsing, there's been a run on the banks there. But this can happen anywhere. You all remember Northern Rock. It's only 2008, it ain't that long ago. Once you get the whisper of some potential thing going wrong, it's too late. You've got to do this before the crisis actually hits you and your street and your town and your country. You've got to do it now. You've got to get cash outside the banking system, because the ATMs can be switched off centrally overnight at the flick of a switch or the command of a stroke of a pen from a government minister. You have got no control over that. The only thing you can control is the stuff that's sitting in your safe, in your safety deposit box, as long as, again, it's outside the banking system, because they can be locked as well. You need things like cash outside the system. You need gold, you need silver. And I don't mean ETFs on paper. I mean Britannia coins, I mean Krugerrands, I mean maple leafs. You need this stuff in your house, in the hole in your garden. You need independent resources. And I think this is also why we're suddenly seeing a revival in Bitcoin, because it's independent money outside the system. And again, I'd urge you not to keep it on the exchanges, but to take it off the exchange onto your cold storage wallet, your Trezor, your Ledger. Get it out of the digital world, because the digital world is wonderful. The internet has made so many things possible, so many new business models, so many communication media. It means we can see what's really going on in places like Ukraine without having to take the filtered stuff through the mainstream media. It's been fantastic in so many ways, but it's also so dangerous. Your digital footprint is everywhere, and they are watching you. I'm not wearing a tin hat. This is not a conspiracy theory. They are watching you, and they can switch you off from the financial system at a moment's notice. They can put in travel restrictions. They can stop you leaving the country just because you have an opinion that's different to them. You turned up at a peaceful protest they didn't like. Whatever whim it is, their power, ultimately to the point of obviously the military and prison and so on, is enormous. So you have to have independent means outside of the electronic and digital world. And if you haven't woken up to that yet, you really are not seeing the wood for the trees. You ain't smelling the coffee. This is a crisis period. The 2020s are going to be one of the most challenging decades any of us will live through. I've given you some ideas, some thoughts, some strategies today. There'll be a lot more to come on the channel in the coming weeks and months. I hope you found that useful. Please do me a favor, like this video, share it with your friends and family and colleagues in your social networks. Let's get as many people as possible tuned in to what's really going on in the 2020s, so they can also invest to survive and thrive in this period of crisis. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again very soon.